Before I share this tale, remember, everything in this world has a purpose, and what's meant to be will find its way. So even if friends and family turn away, don't lose heart. In a quaint village in Ghana, Frimpong, a young man, lived a life shadowed by disrespect. Despite being the eldest of 3 brothers, he found no honor at home. His younger brothers, blessed with riches, overlooked him, their wealth building walls instead of bridges. Where they could have lent support, they chose instead to highlight his struggles, often shaming him for his lack of fortune. At family gatherings, the air thick with anticipation of decisions to be made, Frimpong's voice, when he dared to speak, seemed to dissolve into the background, unheard and unacknowledged. His brothers, cloaked in their affluence, dictated the outcomes with an air of finality that left little room for debate. There's an old saying that rings painfully true for Frimpong: poverty is madness and money is power. It seemed that poverty had not only stripped him of respect, but also of his stature, reducing him from the role of an elder to that of a child in his own family's eyes. Frimpong's tale is one woven with sacrifice and overshadowed by sorrow. As the eldest son in a small Ghanaian village, his youth was spent working tirelessly alongside his father on their family farm. This sacrifice was made with hope, a hope that by forfeiting his own chance at education, his younger brothers would flourish academically and later support him and lift his future children to greater heights. This practice, once common in Ghana, saw many eldest children trading textbooks for toil. Tragically, Frimpong's dreams crumbled as his brothers, who rose on the ladder of education, chose to turn away from him. Instead of gratitude and support, they greeted him with mockery and neglect. It was as if they had stolen his birthright, leaving him empty-handed and broken-hearted. In their abandonment, Frimpong's generosity was met with cold indifference, his once hopeful spirit now clouded with a deep sense of betrayal and loss. Frimpong's life had become a tangled web of debts he could no longer manage. When one of his creditors lost patience, he found himself behind bars, his freedom lost to his financial woes. In this desperate hour, his brothers Pepra and Nikitia stepped in, but their help was not born of kindness. Upon his release, Frimpong, grateful and relieved, went to thank them, only to be met with scorn. They branded him the family's troublemaker since their parents' passing, dismissing his struggles as mere nuisances. They claimed they had sold his only piece of land, an inheritance from his parents, to cover his debts and rid themselves of his troubles. Yet the truth was darker than Frimpong imagined. His best friend, Ampem, revealed a bitter twist. The land had never been sold. Pepra and Nketia had kept it, envying the plot he cherished. They had used their own money to pay for his release, not out of brotherly love, but to claim his land without opposition. Betrayed and heartbroken, Frimpong confronted his brothers. They coldly admitted their scheme, justifying their deceit as a necessary act to save him from jail. They offered him a cruel bargain: repay the money they used, and perhaps they would return his land. In that moment, Frimpong realized the depths of their betrayal. The land, rich with memories of his parents, was now a token of his brother's greed, a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the pain of loss within a family torn by envy. Frimpong, overwhelmed by despair, faced his brothers with a plea grounded in their shared past. He reminded them of the sacrifices he had made during their childhood, how he had labored to ensure they received the education that now enriched their lives. He implored them to remember that no condition is permanent, hoping to ignite a spark of empathy within them. However, his words fell on indifferent ears. His brothers, ensconced in their own success, dismissed him as a lost cause with no future prospects. Crushed by their cold dismissal, Frimpong realized there was nothing left for him in a community that held no promise of redemption or support. With a heavy heart, he returned home to his wife, explaining the dire situation. He told her about the loss of their land, their only means of sustenance, and his decision to leave the community in search of a better future. Tears streamed down her face as she grappled with the reality of their plight, but she understood his need to go, clinging to the hope that his journey might someday lead him back to them. Before leaving, Frimpong visited his friend Ampem, confiding in him his plans and his desperate need for financial support. Ampem, touched by his friend's dire circumstances but having little to offer, promised to see what he could arrange in the coming days. In this heart-wrenching moment, Frimpong felt the weight of his world crumbling. With nothing but hope to sustain him, he prepared to step into the unknown, driven by the faint possibility of a future where he could return to his family, not as a failure, but as a man redeemed. 2 days after their conversation, Ampem returned to Frimpong with heartening news. In a gesture of profound friendship, he had sold all his goats to gather enough money to help Frimpong start anew. Tears welled up in Frimpong's eyes as he realized the depth of his friend's sacrifice, something his own brothers had refused to offer. Gratefully, he embraced Ampem, asking him to look after his wife in his absence, reinforcing the truth that sometimes friends surpass blood in loyalty and love. With a mixture of sorrow for what he was leaving behind and hope for what lay ahead, Frimpong set off on his journey. After several days of travel, he arrived in a new community, weary yet eager to plant new roots. Luck seemed to smile on him briefly when a local offered him a room to rent. However, Frimpong was unaware of the reputation that preceded his new landlord, known in the community not by his real name, Obiri, but as Aja Ananse, a name synonymous with cunning and wickedness. The locals whispered tales of his sharp dealings and ruthless nature, but Frimpong, a stranger in this tight-knit community, knew none of this. As he settled into his new life, he remained oblivious to the challenging character of the man from whom he had sought shelter, setting the stage for what might become a new ordeal in his quest for a fresh start. One day, Frimpong approached his landlord, Agya Ananse, with a request for land to start farming. He hoped to cultivate a new beginning in this unfamiliar community. However, Ananse responded that he had no suitable land, but promised to inquire with a friend. True to his cunning nature, Ananse visited his friend, who indeed had land available, yet it was far from ideal, swamped and overgrown with old palm trees, clearly unsuitable for farming. Sensing an opportunity to exploit Frimpong's trust and naivety, Ananse persuaded his friend to sell this poor piece of land to him at a low price. Returning to Frimpong, Ananse spun a tale of fertile soil and promising prospects, describing the land as perfect for farming. Frimpong, filled with hope and trust in his landlord, didn't hesitate. He asked for the price and, without a second thought, agreed to pay 3 times what Ananse had paid for it. Frimpong made the payment purely out of trust, without seeing the land. His desperation for a fresh start blinded him to the potential deceit, and his reliance on Ananse's word led him to make a decision that might soon unveil the harsh realities of trusting too readily. Thus, he found himself caught in a web woven by Agya Ananse, a man whose reputation for trickery was well known to everyone but him. This move could either lead to unexpected hardship or a test of Frimpong's resilience in his new life. The next morning, filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety, Frimpong followed Ananse to see the land he had purchased. But as they arrived, his heart sank. Before him lay a waterlogged swamp scattered with old palm trees, land that screamed neglect rather than nourishment. "Landlord, this isn't farmland," Frimpong exclaimed, dismay etching his face. "How can I farm here? I spent all my money on this." Ananse, with a shrug of indifference, replied, "This is what's available. If you can't farm it, there's nothing I can do." Frimpong's desperation surged. He demanded his money back, but Ananse's words cut deep. "It's too late. The landowner has already traveled with your money, and I don't know where he is." Feeling cheated and hopeless, Frimpong decided to salvage whatever he could from the situation. With a heavy heart, he began to clear the palm trees, planning to brew palm wine from them. While chopping, his axe struck something hard beneath the roots of a tree. Curious, he dug around and unearthed 2 ancient boxes. The sight of them sparked a flicker of wonder, yet wary of the unknown, he chose not to open them. With the sun dipping low, Frimpong hurried home, the mysterious boxes in tow. He was torn between despair over his squandered savings and the intrigue of his find. That evening, as he lay awake, the boxes at the foot of his bed whispered promises of secrets long buried. Maybe, just maybe, this twist of fate could lead to a new beginning, or at the very least, a return to his village not as a defeated man, but as one holding the keys to a newfound mystery. Upon returning home with the mysterious boxes, Frimpong felt a mix of dread and excitement pulsing through him. Despite the darkness of the hour, he called his landlord, Ananse, to share the discovery. "I've found something," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue and hope. "It's a box, and I don't know what's inside, but I think we should open it together tomorrow morning. Whatever is inside, we could share it." Frimpong hoped that despite the misfortune of the barren land, this unexpected find might still turn into a blessing. However, Ananse's mind raced with greed. Sleep eluded him as visions of gold and jewels danced before his eyes. Driven by avarice, he couldn't wait for morning. By 10 p.m., he found himself whispering into the ears of the palace elders, spinning a tale of extraordinary treasure found on his property by his tenant. He suggested it could be laden with gold or gems and cunningly proposed a deal to secure their support. "Should this matter reach the palace, speak on my behalf," he pleaded, ensuring their allegiance with bribes and promises of sharing the fortune. Ananse visited about 10 elders that night, each conversation laced with the same crafted lies and bribery, solidifying a network of deceit just to claim ownership of whatever lay within those ancient boxes. This desperate midnight scramble painted a vivid picture of a man who'd let greed overshadow decency, setting the stage for a potentially explosive confrontation with Frimpong, a man who merely wished for a fresh start, but found himself entangled in a web of betrayal and intrigue. Early in the morning, while the first hints of dawn crept across the sky, a loud knocking jolted Frimpong from his sleep. He stumbled to the door, heart pounding, only to find his landlord, Ananse, accompanied by several palace guards. Confusion clouded his mind as one guard sternly declared, "You are summoned to the palace for stealing a box of jewels that belongs to Ananse." Frimpong's shock left him speechless. Before he could gather his thoughts, the group barged into his room. Ananse, with a knowing grin, reached under the bed, his hand closing around one of the boxes. "Yes, this is definitely my box," he proclaimed, as if unveiling a hidden truth. The guards escorted both men to the palace. However, with the chief absent, they locked Frimpong in a small, cold room to await the chief's return. Ananse, pleased with his manipulation, then joined the elders at a local drinking spot. They sat back, crafting further lies over drinks, reveling in their deceit. Laughter filled the air as they plotted against Frimpong, an innocent stranger who had dared to trust. In that dark room, Frimpong felt the weight of his isolation. He was a stranger in a strange land, without a voice or a champion. The one person he had believed in had turned against him, weaving a web of betrayal that left Frimpong trapped and helpless. As the hours ticked by, he grappled with the harsh reality. Who would fight for him? Who would believe his word against the unified deceit of Ananse and the elders? With no friends or family to call upon, his fate seemed grim, hanging by the thread of truth in a tapestry of lies. Several agonizing days passed while Frimpong was confined within the cold, lonely walls of a cell. When the king finally returned, he summoned the elders to the palace to resolve the unsettling matter. In the somber hall of judgment, Frimpong stood with his heart pounding, facing the elders alongside Ananse, each ready to present their side of the story. Ananse took the floor first, his voice steady and assured. "Honorable chief," he began, "a few months ago, this man came to me in search of accommodation. Although a stranger, I trusted him and provided him a room. I've shown him nothing but kindness, offering food and even a plot of land to cultivate. One day, I confided in him about a precious treasure, a box of jewels my parents entrusted to me." He paused, his eyes scanning the room for effect. "I planned to send him to another town to sell some of these jewels on my behalf. However, one fateful evening, upon returning from the farm, I discovered the box was missing from my room. Suspecting Frimpong and fearing he might flee, I chose not to confront him directly. Instead, I hurried here to ensure his capture before he could escape." As Ananse's tale spun through the air, Frimpong felt the weight of despair. His side of the story, the truth, seemed so fragile in the face of Ananse's calculated lies. He stood there, a stranger accused, his fate hanging on the words of a man who had masterfully crafted a narrative to ensnare him. How could he, a simple tenant, a newcomer without ties, challenge the woven web of deceit laid by his own landlord before the watchful eyes of the elders? With no one to vouch for him, his situation seemed dire, as the room filled with the heavy silence of judgment waiting to be passed. As the proceedings unfolded, the chief, already suspicious of Ananse's slick demeanor, called upon Frimpong to share his version of events. With a tremble in his voice, Frimpong recounted the tale of the barren land he was duped into buying and how he stumbled upon the mysterious box while clearing the old palm trees. The chief, seeking further clarity, then asked Ananse for a witness. An elder from the palace confidently raised his hand, declaring that he had seen the box many times during visits to Ananse's home. "Chief, I can assure you, this treasure box has long belonged to Ananse," he stated firmly. His words were quickly echoed by the other elders, who rallied in support of Ananse. The situation darkened for Frimpong when another elder stepped forward, casting more shadows on Frimpong's plight. "Chief, this stranger before us is a thief. His very presence threatens to corrupt our community," he exclaimed. He continued with a fabricated tale. "He once approached me to sell jewels, claiming his landlord had plenty and wouldn't notice a few missing. I warned him against such deeds, yet here we are. He has stolen the entire box." Frimpong listened, horror-stricken, as the elder wove his lies. The room filled with murmurs of agreement from the gathered crowd, their eyes narrow with judgment and fear. Frimpong's heart sank as he realized the gravity of his situation. Alone in a foreign community, His innocence was being smothered by the deceitful testimonies of those he had hoped might seek truth. He stood helplessly, watching as the walls of injustice closed in, his fate seemingly sealed by the conspiring whispers of a community he had once hoped to call home. The air was thick with tension, a poignant reminder of how quickly trust could be overshadowed by suspicion and malice. In the tense silence of the palace, the chief turned to Frimpong and asked if he had anyone to speak on his behalf. Frimpong stood alone, his figure small in the expansive hall, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Great king of this land," he began, his voice cracking under the weight of his despair, "I am at your mercy. I have no one here to speak for me, so treat me as your wisdom dictates. If my fate is to die, then please let it be swift. If it is to be imprisonment, then I shall accept it. What is meant to be will always find its way." He continued, his eyes brimming with resignation. "Even if you set me free, I have nowhere to go and no will to continue. I have lost everything. Ending my life might be a mercy." The court was moved by the raw honesty and palpable sorrow in Frimpong's plea. The air was thick with emotion, the elders and onlookers visibly shaken as they faced the human cost of their judgments. Frimpong's predicament was a poignant reflection of the loneliness and helplessness that can engulf someone in a foreign land. Accused and without an advocate, his situation underscored the profound impact of isolation on a person's spirit and will. Without a single witness to defend him, Frimpong was wrongfully accused of theft. The solemn decree was issued. He was to be locked away, with execution awaiting him at dawn. Ananse, watching from the sidelines, felt a twisted satisfaction, believing that Frimpong's death would bury any risk of revenge or future disputes. The treasure box was promptly returned to Ananse as a symbol of his restored honor. However, as Ananse prepared to leave with his prize, the king halted him. "Ananse," the king said with a stern voice, "since you are found innocent and have regained your treasure, open the box. Let us all see what it contains." The crowd leaned in, their eyes fixed on Ananse, who suddenly paled, his hands trembling as he realized he could no longer hide the contents of the box. What will unfold next in this tale? Will Ananse dare to open the box in front of the king and the eager onlookers? What fate awaits Frimpong as dawn approaches? And what of his wife, his loyal friend Ampem, and his estranged brothers Anketia and Pepra? Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us on Ananse Web of Tales. Your engagement through likes, shares, comments and subscriptions is deeply valued. We're curious to know where you're joining us from, so please, if you're willing, share your location in the comments below.